It started like any other session on Capitol Hill. The Senate was packed. The tension in the room was heavy, not because of what was happening, but because of what wasn't. For weeks, rumors had swirled that something big was coming. Nobody knew what, or from who. But today, as Majority Leader Chuck Schumer launched into his usual rhetoric, everything changed. Then, without warning, Vice President J.D. Vance stood up. Not angrily, not with fanfare, just slowly, deliberately. The room noticed. Whispers began. Cameras shifted. Schumer faltered but kept speaking. Then Vance reached inside his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed and shaking slightly in his hand. He raised it high over his head. For a moment the room went absolutely still. Someone in the gallery gasped. C-SPAN's camera zoomed in. You could hear the sound of a pin drop. Even Chuck Schumer paused. His voice cracked mid-sentence. No one knew what J.D. was holding. But whatever it wasn't political. It was personal. And it was about to change everything. Mr. President, J.D. said quietly, I need to speak. J.D. Vance's voice didn't shake, but his eyes did. He slowly unfolded the fragile piece of paper, smoothing it on the desk before him. This, he said, holding it up again, was written by a man who never came home. The chamber remained silent. Phones lit up, every camera locked in. It's from Sergeant Michael Harlan, J.D. continued, a 27-year-old Marine who died in Kandahar. He wrote this 3 days before he was killed. His wife sent it to my office last week. Not for the press, not for politics, just for someone to finally listen. The first lines echoed through the chamber like a ghost. If you're reading this, I didn't make it home. I just hope someone makes sure my little girl doesn't forget my face. J.D.'s voice cracked. I held this letter for days, he admitted, not knowing what to do with it, until I sat in that VA hearing last night and heard a senator say we can't afford more funding. That's when I knew. This letter doesn't belong in a drawer. People were no longer whispering. They were crying. Even Schumer looked down. Because this wasn't a stunt. It was a son of Ohio carrying the grief of a nation. J.D. Vance laid the letter on the Senate desk as if it were sacred. Michael never got to meet his daughter. J.D. continued. She turned one last week. A small photo slid out from inside the folded paper. A baby girl holding a picture of her dad in uniform. Someone in the back of the room sobbed audibly. A few senators wiped their eyes. The gallery was full of veterans, and you could see it in their faces. They'd heard speeches before, but not this. J.D.'s voice was low, but it reached everyone. We talk numbers, budgets, politics. But I'm begging you, look at her face. Tell me where in our calculations her father's life fits. There was nothing left to say. For the first time in years, Chuck Schumer had no comeback. He just stood there, eyes glistening, mouth half open. Outside the chamber, the internet exploded. Vance shock. Truth held high. Not just politics. But inside, it was just quiet, the kind of quiet you only hear after truth has cut through everything else. J.D. didn't sit down. He wasn't done. Not yet. The baby's photo sat on the desk. The chamber stared at it like it was alive. J.D. Vance didn't speak right away. He just looked at it, like it hurt to remember something. Then he finally whispered, Her name is Grace. Michael never got to hear her laugh. A senator across the aisle shifted uncomfortably. Another wiped her nose with a tissue. I met her mother last Thursday. She told me something I'll never forget. J.D. paused, breath catching in his throat. She said, I don't need apologies, sir. I just want someone to say my husband mattered. That's when the mood changed. This wasn't politics anymore. It was a funeral that never got a eulogy. J.D. picked up the photo again and turned to Chuck Schumer. Do you think we can fit Grace's future into a line item on page 142 of your bill? The senator didn't answer. Couldn't. Because this wasn't budget talk anymore. This was about grief, about sacrifice, about America's soul. And somehow, the room knew it. And for the first time in years, the Senate was completely human. Outside the Capitol, the footage hit the internet like a shockwave. Within 20 minutes, J.D. Vance was trending in 11 countries. Thousands of people shared the clip of the baby's picture. News anchors broke down in tears live on air. Parents of fallen soldiers began flooding J.D.'s office with messages, not with outrage, but with gratitude. One message stood out. A veteran from Arizona wrote, "Thank you for not letting us die forgotten." Inside the chamber, J.D. continued, "Some of you think this letter is emotional manipulation. That's fine. Call it what you want. But for once, let this building feel what the families outside of it feel every single day." A younger senator tried to interject. J.D. stopped him. "Don't speak. Just listen." For the first time in a decade, politicians stopped arguing and started listening. The emotional tide swept through both parties. Staffers cried silently. Reporters dropped their questions and just recorded. One older senator who rarely spoke whispered to a colleague, "He's saying what we were too scared to say." And somewhere in the gallery, Grace's mother sat quietly, her hands clenched. She hadn't been invited. J.D. had brought her anyway. Her name was Emily Harlan, and nobody in that room recognized her until she stood up. She wore a simple blue dress. Her eyes were red, but focused. She wasn't shaking. She was remembering. J.D. turned to the gallery, as if he had planned this moment all along. "Mrs. Harlan, do you want to say something?" Gasps. Protocol didn't allow for this. But no one stopped her. Emily walked down slowly, not with anger, but purpose. She didn't speak into a microphone. She didn't need to. She held a tiny stuffed bear, the one Grace carried every night. "This is the only thing my daughter has of her father. He slept with it in Afghanistan. She holds it every night. She asks me why he's not home, and I don't know what to say anymore." A Senate aide sobbed. A journalist dropped their pen. "So if you want to cut funding again," Emily said, looking straight at the front row, "please, come to my house. Come sit with my daughter and tell her why Daddy didn't come back." The room had no defense, no spin, no statement, only silence. J.D. stood beside her, and in that moment, America was listening. As Emily Harlan stepped away from the floor, the silence in the Senate was louder than any gavel. For a building obsessed with protocol and power, everything in that moment broke form. J.D. Vance didn't speak. He didn't need to. The vice president simply placed the bear Emily had handed him on the Senate's central podium, the same podium used to debate trillion-dollar deals and global treaties. Now it cradled a child's worn-out stuffed toy. Cameras zoomed in. Not a soul moved. And for once, politicians weren't performing. They were mourning. Senator Booker wiped his eyes. Senator Hawley bowed his head. Even Schumer stood still, fingers trembling on his notes, his eyes fixed on the bear. Then someone in the gallery clapped once, then again, and slowly. The chamber filled with soft applause. Not the loud, rally-type cheer. No slogans, no chants, just humanity. J.D. finally looked up and whispered, "If we can't agree on this, on honoring those who gave everything, then maybe we don't deserve to sit in these chairs." And in that moment, it no longer felt like politics. It felt like truth. That night, while the moment exploded across every screen in America, J.D. Vance returned to his office alone. No press, no aides, just silence. He placed the bear gently on the desk and sat with the letter again, the same letter that had shaken the Senate to its knees. Then his phone buzzed. It was a private number. JD hesitated, then answered. Vice President Vance? The voice was deep, hesitant, male. This is Captain Logan Price. I served with Michael. I was with him when he didn't make it. JD didn't speak. His throat clenched. Sir, I just wanted to say thank you. We've written letters. We've begged for help. But today, someone finally spoke for us. JD's eyes welled with tears. Michael never stopped talking about Grace. He never saw her face, but he carried her picture inside his helmet every mission. He said she was his whole reason. The call lasted 14 minutes. When it ended, JD didn't get up. He just sat there, eyes on the photo, the bear beside him, and the weight of millions, military families, broken children, grieving spouses, quietly pressing on his shoulders. By sunrise, JD Vance was the face of something far bigger than politics. Across America, news clips flooded morning TV. Churches lit candles for Grace's father. Veterans posted pictures of their lost friends. Teachers paused class to play JD's speech, and children, some too young to understand war, still cried when they saw the photo of Grace clutching that bear. The hashtags grew louder. Truth held high. Vance shock. Her daddy matters. Remember Michael. Back in Washington, something rare happened. Both parties issued a joint statement supporting emergency legislation to boost veteran family support, funding that had been delayed for nearly a year. Schumer, once speechless, finally spoke to reporters. We disagree on many things, but yesterday JD reminded us of the one thing we cannot afford to forget, the cost of freedom. And Grace, she still didn't know what had happened. But that morning, her mother sat her down and showed her the clip. That's Mr. JD, she said gently, holding back tears. He told the world about your daddy. Grace blinked, smiled softly, and hugged the bear. Then she whispered, "Thank you, Mr. JD." That morning, while America was still reacting, JD Vance sat alone in the White House's Roosevelt room. In front of him was a letter he'd kept buried in his briefcase for weeks. It wasn't part of the speech. It wasn't for public display. It was a personal note, sent anonymously, with only 2 words on the envelope. Read me. He had received it after a speech at Walter Reed Medical Center, but something about the handwriting made his hands shake. Now, finally alone, he opened it. And inside was a letter from his estranged brother, Tim, a former Marine he hadn't spoken to in 6 years. I watched you on TV last week. I saw you hold that little girl's letter in the Senate, and something inside me broke open. Tim's words were raw, unfiltered. I've hated you for what you said when I came home. I've hated the world. I've hated myself. But today, for the first time, I cried for someone other than me. JD dropped the paper. Because suddenly, it wasn't just Grace's story. It was his. In a quiet corner of his office, JD looked out the window toward the Lincoln Memorial. He wasn't thinking about speeches or strategy. He was thinking about a boy with a black eye and trembling hands, himself at 12, hiding behind a couch as his mother screamed. He remembered Tim dragging him out of the house, whispering, "We're not going to be like them, not us." But life had different plans. Tim enlisted at 18. JD went to Yale. They never spoke after the funeral. Just silence and scars. Until now. JD folded the letter and slid it into his coat pocket. Then he picked up the phone. "White House switchboard," the voice chirped. "This is the Vice President," JD said slowly. "I need you to find someone for me. His name is Timothy Vance." There was a pause on the line. "Sir, are you okay?" JD's voice cracked. "No, but I want to be." Outside, protesters still held signs, some cheering him, some calling him a stunt. But inside, he was just a man who missed his brother. It took hours, but at 8:17 p.m., JD's phone rang. Unknown number. He picked up, breath tight. JD. It was him. Tim's voice had aged, worn by war and regret, but JD knew it instantly. Neither of them spoke at first. Silence filled the line, heavy and honest. Finally, JD whispered, "I didn't know how to say I was sorry." Tim replied, "I didn't know how to ask you to." There were no perfect words, just broken ones, pauses, old wounds reopening. "I watched what you did for that little girl," Tim said. "You stood up for her dad, like no one stood up for me." JD's throat closed. "I should have. You were my hero." A long pause. Then Tim, with a trembling voice, asked, "Can I meet her? The little girl? Grace?" JD exhaled, heart pounding. "You'll meet her," he said. "But first, I want to meet you." They both cried quietly. No cameras, no politics, just two broken brothers trying to find their way back. And in that moment, JD Vance wasn't a vice president. He was just a little brother saying, "Let's go home." 3 days after the Senate shockwave, JD Vance stood at the edge of a quiet park in Ohio. He was waiting for someone very special. Grace and her grandmother had just flown in from Texas. No cameras, no press. Just a reunion, long overdue. Grace ran to him, her little arms wrapping around his waist. JD bent down, hugging her tight. "Is it true?" she whispered. "Did you show them Daddy's letter?" JD nodded, his voice cracking. "I did. And they listened, sweetheart." She looked up with wide eyes. "Did it help?" He paused, holding back tears. "It's starting to." Then Grace did something that stunned him. She reached into her tiny backpack and pulled out a crumpled photo, her father in uniform, holding baby Grace in one arm and her tiny handprint on a napkin in the other. "I want them to see this next time," she said. JD's throat tightened, because what she held was far louder than any speech. It was love, loss, a legacy. And in that moment, he knew what had to come next. Back in D.C., the Senate chamber was bracing for another long day of gridlock and posturing. But no one expected what came next. As cameras rolled, J.D. Vance walked to the podium again, holding Grace's photo in one hand and a worn Marine ID card in the other. He didn't speak immediately. He knelt. Gasps echoed across the room. "This is Staff Sergeant Miguel Reyes," he said softly. "Father, husband, hero, and forgotten casualty of our delay." He placed the photo on the floor beside him. Then, holding back tears, he added, "I promised his daughter, I promised her, that this chamber would see him." Schumer watched, stunned. Some senators bowed their heads. Others blinked back tears. This wasn't politics anymore. It was human, raw, real. JD stood again, voice shaking. "We cannot keep ignoring the families begging for help, and we cannot heal this country until we honor those who gave it everything." Phones lit up. Hashtags exploded again. But none of that mattered, because in the silence that followed, America cried. Outside the chamber, a small crowd had gathered. Reporters, veterans, parents, some holding signs, others holding tears. But JD only looked for one face. Tim. Standing at the edge in a worn leather jacket, JD's brother waited, eyes wet, hands trembling. They hadn't seen each other in over 6 years. As JD stepped toward him, Tim tried to speak, but choked on his words. JD embraced him before either could say anything. "I'm proud of you," Tim finally whispered. "I'm proud to be your brother again." JD didn't speak. He didn't need to, because sometimes all that matters is showing up when it counts most. A reporter shouted, "Mr. Vice President, what happens now?" JD turned, arm around Tim's shoulder, and simply said, Now we fight for them all." The world had seen a political moment, but those who were there, they saw something else. A broken country slowly stitching itself back together. One hug, one letter, one child's drawing at a time. Late that night, J.D. Vance sat alone in his office, lit only by the soft glow of a desk lamp. Before him lay one final letter. It had arrived hours after his Senate stand, sent by the widow of a fallen veteran from Indiana. No cameras, no hashtags, just raw grief on paper. My husband died in silence, but tonight, you gave him a voice. The words hit J.D. like a punch to the chest. She enclosed something else, a torn American flag patch from her husband's uniform. J.D. held it in his hands, staring at the frayed edges. Suddenly a memory came rushing back. His own mother, once trembling beside a closed casket, clutching his stepfather's dog tags. That was before the politics, before the spotlight. Now, it was personal again. J.D. stood up, walked back to the Senate chamber, and quietly placed the letter and flag on every senator's desk. Some would wake to find it, others would ignore it, but one way or another, they would all see it. And in that silent gesture, the movement was no longer his, alone. June 12, 2025, 11:14 a.m. The Senate floor was silent. For once, no yelling, no filibusters, no political theater, just hearts pounding. J.D. Vance took his seat beside the chamber clerk, watching as the roll call vote for the Veteran Accountability and Family Support Act began. Mr. Booker? Aye. Mr. Cruz? Aye. Mr. Fetterman? Aye. One by one, the names echoed through the chamber, eyes filled with tears. Staffers whispered. Even Chuck Schumer stared across the floor, his lips tight, hands trembling slightly. Then came the moment. Mr. Vance? J.D. slowly rose. He didn't smile. He didn't grandstand. He simply looked up at the gallery, where Grace and her grandmother sat, eyes wide, fingers interlocked. Aye, J.D. said softly. The chamber exploded with emotion. Applause wasn't allowed, but some couldn't help it, because they all knew. This vote wasn't about policy. It was about promises. A promise to a little girl who lost her hero, and a promise from a man who kept his word. Outside the Capitol, as the sun began to set over Washington, J.D. Vance stepped out with Grace beside him. She held her father's photo. He held the flag patch, now framed. The media surged forward, but J.D. turned to Grace. You ready? He asked. She nodded, and together, they walked to the podium. J.D. didn't speak long. He didn't have to. We didn't change everything, he said, but we changed something. And now it's your turn. He looked into the camera, not like a politician, but like a father, a son, a brother. If you've ever loved someone who wore the uniform, if you've ever lost someone who never came home, or if you just believe this country still has a heart, then share this story. Say their names, show their pictures, and never, ever stay silent again. Then J.D. Vance stepped aside, and Grace, trembling but brave, lifted her father's photo high into the air. Phones flashed, viewers wept. The truth held high surged again. And in that moment, the world didn't see a vice president. It saw hope. If this story moved you even a little, please take a second to honor the real heroes behind it. Drop a comment below with the name of someone you love who served or sacrificed. Click subscribe if you believe in truth, family, and second chances, because this isn't the end. It's just the beginning. And hey, if J.D. Vance's courage touched your heart, let's make sure the world hears it. Look, share, remember.